Hey, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another episode of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. And this week, we are previewing the Mountaineers' next matchup, the TCU Horned Frogs, who come into this matchup with an identical 3-1 record. But if you ask Las Vegas, this game isn't going to be very close. So taking a look at it, the spot earlier today, I've been seeing it for the last few days, fluctuating between 11 and 12.5 points now. The bettors think that TCU is going to be better than the Mountaineers this upcoming Saturday at 7 p.m., game being on TCU. I'll get into that in a second, but hold that in the back of your minds as I go throughout this video, that is what the nation is thinking, that the Mountaineers are going to get beat by, as the people on Twitter like to say, at least 2 touchdowns. So let's take a look at the history of this matchup, as I do in every single preview video. It's been 11 matchups between the Mountaineers and Horned Frogs since becoming Big 12 Conference members in 2012. West Virginia leads the all-time series 7 wins but to 5 losses. If you include the Mountaineers' 1984 Blue Bonnet Bowl victory, 31-14 over TCU at the old Astrodome in front of 43,000 fans in Houston, Texas. Wasn't old enough to see that one in person, but doing the research in that game, that was a wild matchup that I guess the Mountaineers just dominated from start to finish in TCU's home state. So the thing is about this series, going back to 2012 between the Horned Frogs and Mountaineers, is it's been wacky. So anyone who's been around for the last decade following this, yeah, it's been just crazy situation after crazy situation. Let's start off going back 2012, a double overtime 39-38 victory for TCU, in which wide receiver Josh Boyce trapped a pass from quarterback Trevon Boykin on a 2-point conversion play to win in Morgantown. That was a wild ending, and many wild endings in that 2012 season with Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey, that being one of them. In 2013, it was a 30-27 overtime win by the Mountaineers, which was, as we know, one of only 4 on the season for the 2013 year. In 2014, maybe the most memorable between TCU and West Virginia, TCU walked the Mountaineers off 31-30 with a 37-yard field goal as time expired in a game that will really be remembered for 3 things, I feel like. Number 1, the last time the ESPN College Game Day was in Morgantown. Number 2, when quarterback Clint Trickett almost got his head ripped off on a play that wasn't called a penalty. He ended up getting concussed, said after the fact, after the season, that he was, seeing double vision in that game. It's what led to a critical interception late in the game in that contest, in which the TCU was able to get the ball back and kick the field goal. And then, of course, the memorable Terrell Chestnut amazing strip fumble return for a touchdown that's still used in a lot of West Virginia highlight plays. So that was a wild matchup in 2014 in Morgantown. In 2015, it was bad, very bad. The worst of all of the games in this series. West Virginia was throttled 40-10 by TCU's high-powered offense, led by Boykin. You may remember then head coach Dana Holgerson dapped up Boykin on the sideline. It's a moment that still disgusts me to that day, and just a non-competitive matchup. In 2016, this was arguably West Virginia's best performance of the season in 2016, when it beat TCU at home 34-10. In 2017, this was the infamous offensive pass interference call on West Virginia's David Sills that cost the Mountaineers on their final offensive series, as the Horned Frogs won at home 31-24. In 2018, West Virginia got their revenge back with Will Greer as a senior quarterback, destroying TCU in Morgantown 47-10. In 2019, now with Neil Brown at the helm, this was, along with Kansas State, Neil Brown's signature wins for his first seasons in Morgantown, when Isaiah Esdale caught that awesome over-the-shoulder 35-yard fade route from Jarrett Deggy, who came on late in the year for Austin Kendall at quarterback, and the Mountaineers won a game that they really shouldn't have, 20-17. In 2020 and 2021, it was all Mountaineers continuing their streak over the Horned Frogs thanks to solid defense. But last year, 2022, TCU, scorched the Mountaineers right back. And it was really came down to, I feel like, a few plays in that game, if you remember that one in Morgantown. Middle of the third quarter, a series in which WVU had 4 cracks at the end zone from the TCU 8-yard line and couldn't score points when it was a 28-24 TCU game. That would have given the Mountaineers surely a lead if they had scored a touchdown, or at least make it a 1-point game with a field goal. Especially when you consider Malachi Ruffin intercepted TCU's quarterback Max Duggan with 4 minutes to play in the fourth quarter, but then WVU's offense responds by going negative 3 yards on 3 plays. Neil Brown decides to send Ollie Straw out to punt, and that was really the ball game. TCU added really a BS touchdown at the very end to pour salt in the wound to win 41-31. So it was a lot closer than the score indicated, I feel like, and that was a game that really could have potentially spoiled the Horned Frogs national championship game season by not getting into the playoff after they had lost to K-State in the Big 12 championship game. So that's why I'm very skeptical of this 12.5-point spot in this one. TCU's only beat West Virginia by more than 12 points once in this series, and that was arguably with college football's best best offense in 2015. So I just don't see it. I see this being another closely contended game, but I think I understand why. When you look between the lines, look through the numbers, what TCU's done this season. So I'll give you the scouting report really of the TCU offense and defense, give you my 3 keys of the game, and obviously a prediction. So taking a look at this TCU offense, this is about the same amount of points on more yards and more plays per game than last year with Max Duggan at quarterback. 38 points per game on 79 plays per game while recording 500 yards of total offense. That's really outstanding so far. It's the same, just like Texas Tech a week ago. These are very two similar offenses. They want to play fast, they want to play up tempo, they want to move the ball down the field, and they don't want to hold back. They want to fire all their ammo, like an M60, and they're not going to leave, any time to waste whenever they do it for 4 quarters. So TCU's led by 4th-year quarterback. He's only, I think, listed as a sophomore, but he's in his 4th year because of a medical red shirt in the COVID year. So a 4th-year quarterback, just like Garrett Green, at Chandler Morris, averaging 280 passing yards per game on a 69% completion percentage with 9 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. He's the team's 3rd leading rusher also with 184 yards on 29 carries, so averaging 6.3 yards per carry with 2 touchdowns. So we saw that last week with Tyler Shuck being Texas Tech's leading rusher, Chandler Morris also being involved into the run game for TCU's offense. But TCU also has 2 good running backs that it likes to use. Predominantly, it's going to be junior running back Imani Bailey, 483 yards on 81 carries for a 6.0 yards per carry average. That's about outstanding. He has 2 touchdowns already on the air. And he also has he has 3 100-plus yard games to his credit so far this year. So, wow, that's awesome. Last week against SMU, 25 carries for 126 yards and a touchdown, just like really Taj Brooks did to the Mountaineers, doing a lot of his damage in the second half last week against Texas Tech. So watch out for Bailey. Junior running back also Trey Sanders is the backup, just 130 yards on 34 carries, but he does have 4 touchdowns, so might be used in those short yardage situations. And just like Texas Tech did coming into the game last week, TCU likes to toss the ball around to a lot of different receivers, as well as their senior tight end Jared Wiley, who had 2 receiving touchdowns last week against SMU. I'm surprised, honestly, to see a quiet year so far out of Savion Williams. You remember he was the guy who caught the BS touchdown at the end of the game last year in Morgantown, a 6'5", 225-pound junior wide receiver who really seemed to be following in the footsteps of the NFL draft pick Quentin Johnston for TCU, who went the first round last spring. But Williams only has 5 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown on the season. So even though it's been a quiet year so far for Savion, I would watch him especially alongside Wiley whenever they're both out in the same packages and want to go big. Taking a look at this TCU defense, the number that stuck out to me, and this is probably the biggest thing of this entire video, is that TCU coming into this matchup is 121st out of 130 FBS teams in pass defense at 292.5 yards per game. So, if you thought West Virginia was bad after its week 1 game against Penn State, TCU had it rough. Now, I know that number is really inflated given Colorado's quarterback Shedeur Sanders threw for 500 yards on TCU in week 1, but you take a look at the numbers in their 3 matchups. Week 2 against Nichols, week 3 against Houston, and week 4 against SMU. TCU gave up 177 pass yards, 225 pass yards, and 258 yards respectively. So you bottle all that up together, and through the air, the TCU defense has given up, right around over 200 yards per game. So, though TCU's always been good at forcing turnovers, and this year's no different. So 5 interceptions already on the season, just like the Mountaineers have had. And 2 fumble recoveries. But here's where, conversely, really bad pass defense, their rush defense is 16th in the country, only allowing 85 rushing yards per game. So whether you think that's either the defenses want to torch you through the air and they can't run against you, I'm still trying to figure out this TCU defense per se to see how good they are. But you just look at those numbers on paper, they're really susceptible to the pass. Now, as I said, TCU played a Colorado team that I don't think anyone knew what to expect from in week 1 of the season. They were shocked by a sensational performance by Shedeur Sanders and also his wide receiver who played both ways in that game, Travis Hunter, who's now hurt. It went down to the wire 45-42. But then they played 3 pretty below average teams and won by double digits. So that's, again, where I think, this is the kind of matchup that TCU has yet to have. I don't want to try and use this time to compare West Virginia to Colorado so far on the season. I don't know if that's necessarily fair or, if I can even do it because they're such different teams. But it's to say that TCU's had some pretty easy matchups for the last 3 weeks, and the last time that they played a half-decent team, they lost at home. So this will be, I think, that very tough matchup that just doesn't make sense to me again with that 12.5-point spot. So, but if you look at 2 of their games, this is what I want to break down and mention before I get into the 3 keys of the game. Looking at their 2 games against Houston and SMU, TCU owned just slim margins on the scoreboard at halftime. Only then to go out of the series, on their first series out of the half, they went on long drives, over 10-plus plays, used a lot of clock. So and then their opponent countered because you think about it, you're off the field for halftime, you're off the field for a really long drive for the third quarter, so it's almost like you're getting bored, you're playing with fidget spinners over on the sidelines. So they come out, they finally get on the field, they're not in sync, they're not in rhythm, go on a short drive, TCU gets the ball back, scores, and then they've been on the field. They've worn out the opposing defenses being on the field for most of the third quarter, and they're able to take it to teams in the fourth quarter. So if I'm Neil Brown and West Virginia wins the toss, I can't believe I'm saying this, how much of the game weighs upon the coin toss at the end of the day, but West Virginia may want to defer to the second half if they win the toss. But if not, WVU's defense cannot allow the third time to be the charm and become TCU's third straight victim to a third quarter in which WVU's defense gets worn out because it's out on the field the entire time, and by the fourth quarter you're dead. You heard that from Neil Brown in his press conference earlier this week. That's what really hurt West Virginia down the stretch in the fourth quarter against Texas Tech, is they got a little tired. The weather, as we know, opened up, and it was in favorable conditions for TCU's offense, and that's when you saw them score, and that's when you saw them almost score at the very end on the game's final play. So I think out of the first half, no matter how this game goes back and forth, is going to have to be you're going to have to watch that. Do not miss do not miss the first few minutes of the third quarter, and let's see what West Virginia can do out of it. Very, very important. So my 3 keys to the game, I think number 1, this really is, if you look at those numbers, a matchup ripe for the taking through the air. So the biggest question mark I know coming into this game is, who are the Mountaineers going to have at quarterback? Is it Garrett Green? Is it another, the third straight game really for Nico Marchiol to take control of this offense? So it's been quiet, it's been tight-lipped from the team so far this week, not knowing whether, how healthy Garrett Green is. I know that Neil Brown said prior to the Texas Tech game, if he wasn't 100% and he wasn't going to be able to use his wheels, use his athleticism, escape the pocket, be the Garrett Green that we know and love, and is his best version of himself, he wouldn't play. So that's why West Virginia went with Nico Marchiol and won the contest. I'm curious if you have an 80%, a 90%, 95% Garrett Green. Is it Garrett Green? Because if you sitting there right now, and this is obviously the $3.6 million question for Neil Brown and Chad Scott in this offense is, who do you trust as your passer? Because at over 200 yards per game, that you got to think that TCU is going to dare the Mountaineers to throw the ball. They're going to be tough against the run. Can West Virginia still continue to run through that, despite TCU trying to sell out to stop the run? Or can one of these 2 quarterbacks take advantage? If you think that Garrett Green is a better passer than Nico Marchiol, has a better control of this offense, better rapport with the receivers, and there's no real evidence against that argument, I would say, through 4 games, especially if you consider his performance in the Duquesne game. I know it's Duquesne, but Garrett Green had a lights out performance there in week 2. If he's 80 to 90%. I would say let's see what happens. Get him out there and test it out. Even though, the thing is, West Virginia has a bye week coming up, so they have really, 10 or 11 days before the Thursday night matchup against Houston in Houston. So, who do you play? That's going to be a big question. But if it's Garrett Green, I hope he rises up to the challenge, being as close to healthy as humanly possible. Maybe we see fewer designed runs or designed, option plays for Garrett Green to potentially run the ball, and he throws the ball more. So wouldn't that be something? Because I think that's what everybody is really just like salivating for as a Mountaineer fan, is a downfield passing attack. So I really do think, though, this matchup either way at quarterback, how you go, is going to tell a lot about how good this offense truly is right now, and then can be by the end of the year. So it's really a prove-it moment for Neil Brown as a game schemer and a play caller. Everyone involved with this passing attack really needs to step up and make plays for what Neil Brown calls. I'm not saying this is necessarily a must-win by any stretch of the imagination. Again, I'll reiterate this as I do in just about every single video. The goal for this year is 8 wins, including a bowl game appearance, whether that's a 7-5 regular season that you win the bowl game, or 8 wins in the regular season and lose the bowl game. You got to get to 8 wins by the end of the year. So, looking at the rest of the totality of this 8-game schedule down the stretch, all the home games really look winnable. So if you can win 2 perhaps on the road, I'm looking at the Houston matchup coming up. I'm looking at Baylor at the end of the year. Right now on paper, if you look at the ESPN FPI and how they do their rankings, like UCF, this game against TCU, and Oklahoma are really the 3 toughest games remaining on the WVU schedule. So if West Virginia can go up against this defense and have a good day offensively, I think this team could get to that goal by the end of the year. So they have the defensive prowess. If they can just get the same kind of effort out of the offense to match the defense's play, this team could be dangerous. So or can be at least in the top half of this league. So I'm really intrigued by this matchup. Just really to see, not necessarily for the end result, but like where are we? Because I don't think we know. And that's what I made my video on Tuesday of this week, is I don't think we know. We don't have a litmus test. We don't have a feeling. We know about this defense. I think that's proven. I think we get it by now. Winning that Texas Tech matchup last week said a lot about this West Virginia defense, but we still don't know enough about this West Virginia offense beyond a really good offensive line and C.J. Donaldson. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to say there about the offense. Defensively, I loved, and I actually had, thanks to a coworker friend of mine, for telling me about this. I'd heard this concept by Neil Brown out of this press conference earlier this week for the first time, match coverage defense. So didn't really know exactly what that was. Thankfully, I had my coworker Bob tell me all about it. So thanks, Bob, if you're watching. Learning what match coverage is essentially it's man-to-man defense that presents like zone pre-snap. That's probably the simplest way to explain it. So what opposing offenses will want to do is use pre-snap motion to see, what defender follows the man to show that it'd be in man coverage, or if they don't move, it's zone coverage. So with match defense, again, it's man-to-man by the first person who presents in your zone is your man. And it's really effective against Big 12 type offenses who throw a lot of quick passes, nickel and diming you down the field. So the way that you can run it effectively is if you have at least five guys in the secondary who can all cover pretty well. There's no real weakest link. So when you look across this five in Beanie Bishop, Malachi Ruffin, Aubrey Burks, Marcus Floyd, and Anthony Wilson, I don't think there is a weakest link. I really liked what this secondary has done over these last couple of weeks against Texas Tech and Penn State. And you've got two really good linebackers in the middle in Lee Koba and Trey Lathan. So I love it. I love this defensive scheme, what we've seen so far. I think it's working. So continue. I think the blueprint was really laid out in that Texas Tech game last week. So stick with it. Continue what you're doing. Play with confidence. Jordan Leslie's been calling 2 great games in back-to-back weeks. So stick with it. Stick what's working. And hopefully that West Virginia makes some one-on-one tackles like they have. I think they're number 2 in the Big 12 conference. It was a really good stat. I'm sorry. I would give the credit to who I saw this from and retweeted it. But it was I think C.J. Vogel might have been a Texas fan or something, but it showed the statistics for one-on-one missed tackles. So you get the idea. Is who had the fewest missed tackles, and West Virginia I think was number 2 in the conference with only 24 missed tackles through 4 games. So that's impressive, and that's what wins you ball games. Assignment-based football that West Virginia is executing on so far through 4 games. So, and that's my other point, is not getting tired defensively in the fourth quarter like you did against Texas Tech. So it's imperative for this offense in the third quarter to control the clock, keep the TCU offense off the field, and fight fire with fire, do exactly to TCU what they just did to SMU and Houston in back-to-back weeks. And don't let your defense get tired out onto the field. Sustain drives. My third point is, I think, what I would deem overcoming the unexpected or the unpredictable in this wild matchup. As I went through the history at the beginning of this video, TCU this matchup always has wacky things. Just goes down to the wire, or officials' calls, which obviously you can't control, crazy turnovers, whatever. I mean, very similarly, to the Baylor game of last year in Morgantown, where, you had Blake Shapen get knocked out of the game. You had a blocked extra point return for a touchdown. You had multiple turnovers by both teams. It was just, that's what happens against TCU, it seems like. So if you can just play sound football, you don't have the crowd like you did in Morgantown for the last 3 weeks to really back you up. So I would question, is this team turning a corner with how it performs on the road? We saw how they ended on the road last year against Oklahoma State, even though against a much fiercer, tougher opponent week 1 in Penn State, who may end up winning the national championship this year. We'll see. Is West Virginia turning a corner in its road performances? I think we'll find out a lot more come Saturday. So the other point I'll make, and this isn't really one of my 3 keys to victory, but it's just something that like I'm noticing that I want to speak into existence on this field, and I think it's what's, part of the trust the climb process that I think is making West Virginia a better team. And obviously we have to see the results as this season goes along to prove that. But it's West Virginia becoming more of a player-led team instead of a coach-led team. You hear about this a lot across multiple sports, that especially when new coaches come in, that they almost have to overcoach. They have to be the ones who are really lighting the fire under the players to get them ready on game days and things like that. At least from what I see from a lot of the West Virginia highlight videos, and being at 2 games so far this season and seeing how players respond in different situations, is I think this is becoming more of a player-led team. Defensive, and also listening to some of I really love the Country Roads Trust interviews with Amanda Mazey so far this season, getting to know a little bit more about Trey Lathan, getting to know a little bit more about Nico Marchiol and CJ Donaldson. So I really encourage any Mountaineer fan to go out there and watch those, because it gives you good player insight that you get more so outside of the press conference setting, in a more after game, you're caught up in the game and the adrenaline's still running, and you're coming off that high or a win, or you're really upset after a loss. So take them out of that environment after the fact during the week ahead, and getting them to talk about it a little bit more level-headed, a little bit more controlled. I really like what I hear out of these players so far, and I just think we're seeing that on both sides of the ball. Defensively with Lee Koba, a senior player, Sean Martin, Beanie Bishop's been a great addition, I feel like, in this secondary. Feels like Beanie Bishop's been around for, multiple years now. I just love what I'm seeing out of that guy. And then on the offense, we know we get it out of many on the offensive line. Jaquay Hubbard being very vocal, Zach Frazier being the unquestioned leader, but Wyatt Milam has been fantastic. You haven't heard his name called at all this year. He's just been great at left tackle. And then at the quarterback position, that Nico Marchiol and Garrett Green are, really backing each other up. They're really supporting each other. Even when Green didn't play last week, and you could tell in the pick game, he really wanted that. He wanted to play in the backyard brawl. He almost didn't want to come out off the field, but just knew he couldn't walk on it. With that ankle sprain. You didn't see that. You didn't see that between Austin Kendall and Jarrett Daggy. You didn't see that between Jarrett Daggy and Garrett Green. You didn't see that between JT Daniels and Garrett Green. That these guys are playing for each other. They're playing for a purpose. And I don't want to get too caught up into I don't know, how do I want to say this? Sometimes it's almost like the Rudy kind of feeling that, like, if we play together, that we can do anything and stuff like that. And like sometimes I think that's a little overrated. That talent beats lesser talent most times, especially if they have also better coaching to complement it. But I think with this team, it's a little bit different. It's just got that a little bit different feeling that Neil Brown doesn't have to go over there and overcoach these players, that they're doing it themselves. You have some upperclassmen leaders who are holding some of the younger guys accountable, but the underclassmen are really stepping up and playing well. So I think it's credit all down the organizational structure, all the way down to the players, to the recruiting, the retention, the development, the coaching. So I feel good. I feel which might be scary coming into this matchup with TCU, but I think they are. I think they're going to go out there. They're not going to embarrass themselves. They're going to play hard, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to stick with my prediction, though, from the beginning of the season, and this is where. So I'm now 3-1 on the year, missing out on the Texas Tech game last week. So really happy that I was wrong in that regard. That the weather ultimately proved to be so beneficial that God smiled on the Mountaineers last week in Milan Puskar Stadium by providing that wind, providing that rain, and Tropical Storm Ophelia. So really neutralized Texas Tech back down from being able to play that crazy up-tempo offense. So I still think TCU is going to be able to do that in this matchup, given the weather conditions. Going to be really perfect for them down there at home. They haven't left the state of Texas yet, so they haven't had to do any sort of travel. It's a night game. You're at home. You're wearing all. It's a blackout. It'll be pretty crazy. But I think this is going to be another one of those wild, wacky type of matchups like we had with Baylor last year. So that's what I called at least preseason. So I'm just going to kind of stick with my gut, and that gut feeling from July and August is that it's going to go down to a 1-point game. Another 1-point game between TCU and West Virginia that the Horned Frogs are going to end up winning 24-23. So as I said at the beginning of the season, that would have brought the record for the Mountaineers down from 2 and 3. The worst that West Virginia can have come Sunday is 3 and 2. So I'm excited. I'm happy. I figured that was exactly where West Virginia would want to be, or better, by the end of September. So I feel like West Virginia is playing with house money. It can go out there. It can be reckless in a good way. I mean, like, don't want to be too crazy out there, but I think there's nothing holding you back. You're playing. Do not play not to lose. It's not the Pitt game from a couple of weeks ago. You do not have to circle the wagons, go turtle in yourself and run the ball every single time. Go out there, play free-flowing football. Don't hold back. Play the best that you can and try and go win this matchup. Go beat them, because they're not perfect. They're definitely fallible. So. That's what I hope to see come Saturday night. And if West Virginia gets to 4-1, fantastic. Then that's awesome going into the bye week. Go and get Garrett Green completely healthy, and some other guys get them healthy. And then you get to go on a Thursday night matchup against your former coach in Dana Holgorsen, the lowly Houston Cougars. And how fun will that one be before then West Virginia comes back and has a homecoming matchup against Oklahoma State. So I don't want to get too far in front of me. I hope that this is a Mountaineer win come Sunday, and I'll come back and I'll review the game afterwards. So go Mountaineers, go beat the Horned Frogs. Tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, and your predictions are crazy, Carson. So let's see what happens out there. Hail West Virginia. If you like this content, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear your comments, how you're feeling for this game. So you can comment on here. You can follow me on Twitter and comment on there. So I love hearing from all these fans who have commented so far on these videos. So I really appreciate the feedback. I'll try to respond to as many as I possibly can. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll talk on Sunday. Hail West Virginia. Let's go.